This portion of the John Fredericks Show is brought to you by Hargrave Military Academy. Attend an educational and informative open house event at Hargrave Military Academy in Chatham, Virginia. For more information, visit online at hargrave.edu. Hargrave Military Academy. Build his future.
Joining us now is Congressman from the 4th District of Virginia, Republican Randy Forbes. Been on my show many times. Always great to have me. Also is a key figure on the Armed Services Committee in the House. And Congressman, I can say this without being unabashed at all. You've become a national defense figure, both in the United States and globally. So we want to thank you, sir, for being with us today.
Well, John, it's always a pleasure to be with you, and glad to have you back here.
All right. It's been fabulous. I'm glad to be back. Now, I enjoyed my 12 months in Washington, D.C., no doubt. Certainly enjoyed being able to just go over the water and go up to your office and stuff like that. But there's no doubt that I'm a lot more energized being back here in the Tidewater area. I'm fired up. And but I want to get right to the Syrian situation. Secretary of State John Kerry yesterday essentially, Congressman, threw down the gauntlet and laid out what was interpreted by many, me included, that the United States is preparing to take some form of military action. Here's my question. What's the objective?
Well, John, I think that's not only your question. I think that's the question the country should be asking. What we want to be very, very careful of is to recognize where this administration has put us as of today. As you and I have talked many times before, they have reduced our military capacity by making cuts literally from the moment they came in office that are over $500 billion, about $587 billion. In fact, our staff, the Armed Services Committee, would say they're more like $778 billion. And then in addition to that, they added sequestration on top of that. So we have a very, very reduced capacity already. Second thing, John, instead of focusing on building up the military when they came in, they focused on putting all their energy and effort and money into social agendas for the military. And the result is now that we are very, very stretched. And I'm very concerned about us launching a military action in Syria without knowing, one, the legal basis for doing that, and number two, what our objective is of getting in and getting out. If it's simply, as the Secretary of State was indicating, to somehow just punish Syria like some large school mom that would go in and wrap them on the hand because they had bad behavior, that's not what the United States should be involved in. And then just two last points, John. Because we have weakened our capacities, I think you're going to find two things. First of all, those who would be in opposition to us, China, Russia, aren't nearly as concerned about what we say as they would have been a few years ago. But the second thing is, when you're talking about consultation with Congress and allies, which the President and the administration have been talking about, they haven't had consultation with Congress. They've made a few phone calls to people they wanted to make, but they've got to comply with the War Powers Act. And if they don't, I think their action would be illegal. And secondly, when you're talking about our allies never put any resources in there, hardly, to do it. So we're talking about major resources, major cost to the United States of America.
I mean, it certainly seems to average citizens that military intervention of any kind in Syria doesn't make a lot of sense. Recent public opinion surveys just out show that nearly 65% of Americans don't think we should do anything, and under 10%, only 9% think the U.S. has to take some action. I want to get back to the legal situation, Congressman, if I may. One of the things that I brought up earlier, I want to get your reaction, is that right now the sovereign government, the recognized government of Syria, is the Assad regime. You might hate him. He might be a despot, but right now he's the recognized authority, and they're in the middle of a civil war. So I guess my question is, if we were to launch a military strike, missile, Tomahawk, whatever, I mean, is that not then an act of war on another country that we have no ally at stake and we have no national interest at stake?
Well, John, I think it clearly is. And let me kind of give the reverse. If another country were to launch a similar bomb, missile, rocket into New York City today, would we determine that to be an act of war? And I think very clearly we would. When you look at Syria, regardless of whether we recognize the regime or we like the regime that's there, the reality is that the president cannot use legal force for the United States military intervention under the War Powers Act unless he has one of three things. He either has to have written permission from Congress, which he doesn't, or he has to have the fact that we have been attacked, which we have not been, or third, that we are under imminent threat of being attacked. None of those three things exist. So I would maintain that if he takes military action outside of that, it would be contrary to law. And what really frightens me, John, with this administration is I asked that question to the administration back in Libya, and they told me that it was more important for them to get international permission than it was to get congressional permission. And that just flies in the face of all the balance of powers arguments that we have had. It flies in the face of our Constitution.
That's unbelievable. So this, what you're saying, so they understand it, is the position of this administration, which you've got to ask yourself what their foreign policy is anyway, because nobody can quite figure it out. They basically said their chief concern was the international community rather than Congress, right?
I asked that specific question to them. If they had to come back and get congressional approval for any action, they said no, international. And then I asked them which was more important for them to get international approval or congressional approval. They said unequivocally it was international approval. That, I think, should be shocking to individuals in this country that they have come that far where they think getting international approval is what justifies them to take military action as opposed to getting it from the people of the United States of America. That's why those 65% polls don't really matter to them. That's not what is driving them. What's driving them is whether or not they get a stamp of approval from two or three token allies who put very little resources in to give them legitimacy to do what they want to do.
Congressman, there's a number of Republicans now that are coming to, I guess, the defense of the president and also saying that we need to intervene militarily. We need to do something. John McCain, Lindsey Graham, the usual suspects, but also now some in the House. Peter King weighed in on the other day. How do you reconcile that in the Republican caucus?
Well, John, as you know, I can't reconcile everything every Republican does. I don't reconcile how some of the Republicans have voted to make cuts in national defense or supporting of sequestration or any of those things, and I don't even try to speak for them. I let them speak for themselves. But I would simply say this. It is very easy to have bravado and beat yourself on the chest and say whenever any bad actor anywhere in the world does something bad, yes, by gosh, the United States ought to drop some bombs. We ought to do something to punish them. The reality, though, is what we have to do is come back to the exact question that you asked at the beginning of this show, which was, what's our objective? What's our strategic method of performing that objective? But then there is a second question, John. Where are we going to get the resources and the capability of performing that objective? And then a final one, what's our exit strategy after we do that? You don't just drop these bombs and have these military interventions and then walk in and say, okay, we're going home now and let's just play nice. You know, we've had military experts indicate to us that an action in Syria could involve us for as much as 10 years. We don't want that kind of activity, and we need to know that objective, what the strategy is, and what resources it's going to take before we start beating ourselves on the chest and saying, yeah, let's just go do this.
Congressman, let me ask you this. If you had the opportunity right now to advise President Obama on what to do in Syria, if he called you up on the bat phone, so to speak, what would your counsel be to the president?
I would say first you need to define what your military objective is, why you believe that's important, where you're going to get the resources to do it, and then you need to convince two groups of people. One, the American people, and you should never do this military action right now when you have a majority of the American people who don't know why we're getting involved in Syria. He needs to do an education job to the American people before he takes this action. And the second thing is he needs to have congressional approval before he takes the action. And I would advise him, if he didn't have those two things, that he needs to be very, very careful about launching a military action against Syria.
Congressman, final question. If the president went to Congress and asked for that authorization with the information that you have at your fingertips right now, because we don't know what may happen in tomorrow or a week, but if the action were to be asked for today, where would Congressman Forbes fall in that?
With the preface that you said of the information I have today, it
Yes.
would be not to take military action.
Not to take action. Okay. Congressman, we want to thank you for your time with us today and for being on the John Fredericks Show, WHKT AM 1650 in Southeast Virginia and throughout Central Virginia. Congressman, if people want to weigh in, they want to get more information, where do they go?
They can go to our website. They just pull up Congressman J. Randy Forbes, and we've got a lot of information on there that they can pull off and get whatever information they want, or let us know their thoughts, and we read all of their comments and their emails.
Congressman, we appreciate your accessibility and your time. Look, I got to give one shout out, though, to your new communications director, Dean Petrone. He's doing a great job. I can always reach him. Great dialogue, great guy, and you made an excellent choice there.
John, we've been blessed with a great staff, as you have, and thanks so much. It's always a pleasure to be with you.
All right, sir.